And now, coming to you from an undisclosed location, it's the Novus Ordo Watch Tradcast.
You've got to be kidding.
You can't make this stuff up.
Look at what Francis is doing to so many people who mean to be good and faithful traditional Catholics. They are abandoning faith in the papacy instead of abandoning Francis. That's what he's doing to them, all the while they think they're being faithful to Catholic tradition. If Francis is the Pope, and if pre-Vatican II traditional Catholic teaching is valid, something that is verbally and sometimes quite vociferously maintained by the Recognize and Resist camp, then we should be able to just substitute Francis for Pope or Roman Pontiff or Vicar of Christ and so on in those pre-Vatican II magisterial documents, right? And the result should be perfectly acceptable to people like Mr. Hunwick, Michael Matt, Chris Ferreira, John Venari, John Salza, and the whole gang, right? So we could call this the put your money where your mouth is game. So let's begin. First, we'll go to Pope Pius XII's encyclical Mystici Corporis, numbers 40 through 41. This is the original text. Quote, that Christ and his vicar constitute one only head is the solemn teaching of our predecessor of immortal memory, Boniface VIII, in the apostolic letter Unam Sanctam, and his successors have never ceased to repeat the same. They therefore walk in the path of dangerous error who believe that they can accept Christ as the head of the Church while not adhering loyally to his vicar on earth. They have taken away the visible head, broken the visible bonds of unity, and left the mystical body of the Redeemer so obscured and so maimed that those who are seeking the haven of eternal salvation can neither see it nor find it. Unquote. Okay, so now let's replace the various references to the Pope with references to Jorge Mario Bergoglio, Pope Francis. Let's see how that sounds. Quote, that Christ and Francis constitute one only head is the solemn teaching of our predecessor of immortal memory, Boniface VIII, in the apostolic letter Unam Sanctam, and his successors have never ceased to repeat the same. They therefore walk in the path of dangerous error who believe that they can accept Christ as the head of the Church while not adhering loyally to Francis on earth. They have taken away the visible head, broken the visible bonds of unity, and left the mystical body of the Redeemer so obscured and so maimed that those who are seeking the haven of eternal salvation can neither see it nor find it. Unquote. So, what do you think? You think John Venari would put his name to that statement? Didn't think so. Now, for the next one, to save time, I won't quote you the original first, okay? I'll just go right ahead with the modified version. So, here we go. Pope Leo XIII, Apostolic Letter, Epistola Tua. Quote, if it should happen that those who have no right to do so should attribute authority to themselves, if they presume to become judges and teachers, if inferiors in the government of the universal church attempt or try to exert an influence different from that of Francis, there follows a reversal of the true order. Many minds are thrown into confusion, and souls leave the right path. It is to give proof of a submission which is far from sincere to set up some kind of opposition between one pontiff and another. Those who, faced with two differing directives, reject Francis to hold to the past are not giving proof of obedience to the authority which has the right and duty to guide them, and in some ways they resemble those who, on receiving a condemnation, would wish to appeal to a future council or to a pope who is better informed. Unquote. Maybe we'll just leave that uncommented. Then I've got one just for Michael Matt and John Venari, who are both journalists. A little further on in the same apostolic letter by Pope Leo XIII, we read this, quote, the task pertaining to them, them meaning the journalists, the Pope's talking about journalists, the task pertaining to them in all the things that concern religion and that are closely connected to the action of the Church in human society is this: to be subject completely in mind and will, just as all the other faithful are, to their own bishops and to Francis, to follow and make known their teachings, to be fully and willingly subservient to their influence, and to reverence their precepts and assure that they are respected." Unquote. I told you this was fun. Here, just one more, from the First Vatican Council, Dogmatic Constitution, Pastor Aeternus, Denzinger, 1830. Quote, "And since Francis is at the head of the universal church by the divine right of apostolic primacy, we teach and declare also that Francis is the supreme judge of the faithful, and that in all cases pertaining to ecclesiastical examination, recourse can be had to his judgment. Moreover, that the judgment of Francis, whose authority is not surpassed, is to be disclaimed by no one, nor is anyone permitted to pass judgment on his judgment. Therefore, they stray from the straight path of truth who affirm that it is permitted to appeal from the judgments of Francis to an ecumenical council as to an authority higher than Francis." Unquote. All right, we could spend hours doing this, right? You get the idea. Folks who believe Francis is Pope must affirm these things I just said, because that is the Catholic teaching on the papacy. So no, you cannot take this middle position where you have your Pope and beat him too. To deny Catholic dogma on the papacy is heresy. To affirm it but refuse submission in practice is the sin of schism. Well, Catholic theology has consequences. All this turmoil we're seeing now in the Novus Ordo Church with Francis and Amoris Laetitia and stuff, this is all simply the necessary practical consequence of the harebrained idea that a public heretic can be pope. What we're seeing is the false recognize and resist position blowing up in everybody's face. It's finally being put to a real test in practice, and it's failing miserably. The square peg of Francis will not fit into the round hole of the papacy. And so the recognize and resistors start using a hammer and a chisel on both until they somehow fit. The problem is they've modified the hole and or the peg, or both. They either deny some fact about Francis, something he said or did, or they deny some aspect of the papacy. Well, a Catholic is allowed to do neither, okay? It's time to junk the square peg and insist on a round one. But it highlights the quandary that the semi-traditionalists have. On the one hand, Catholic teaching requires them to be in union with the Pope. On the other hand, Catholic teaching requires them not to be in union with heretics. So what is the necessary conclusion? The necessary conclusion is that either Francis isn't a heretic or Francis isn't the Pope. But this middle ground sort of position where you can have your Pope but yet not be in union with his religion is absolutely impossible.